Hey everyone, it's Silver. We're going to be doing another product review today. We have the Razer Huntsman V2. It's a gaming keyboard. It is actually a higher end keyboard. Shoutouts to Esports Discovery for providing this to me. I'm going to give their links in the description. Esports Discovery is intended to help emerging gamers and basically people who are in esports to find their steps. They provided me with this unit here for review. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll basically get into it. Quick note again, my review itself here is going to be my own thoughts. So I'm going to share my thoughts on the product after having tried it out for a couple of weeks here. Had a good amount of time to try it out. Keyboards are pretty crucial, especially for PC gaming. But that being said, you don't always necessarily just use your keyboard for gaming purposes. It is a computer after all. As a job, I basically do use my keyboard quite a bit. It's important that it functions very well and it's comfortable. On the gaming side of things, it's very important that you have good response time. Possibly if you want customization, you can have RGB, and also that this thing can withstand quite a bit of usage because you're going to be using it quite a bit, being a keyboard, which is one of the key elements in a computer. This review is going to comprise 3 sections. So we're going to have one on features, on performance, and on personal thoughts. Let's get into the features portion. Now, I did open this up off camera, so I'm just recreating the process here, but you've got a manual that's tucked in very nicely. I always like how Razer presents their packaging for all of their products. The keyboard itself is there. The wrist pad is underneath, so we're going to take a look at each element separately. You can see from the wrist pad itself that it is very squishy. It's actually quite soft. Now, this particular keyboard has a couple of things that are very important to it. So it has the Razer Optical switches, which they're basically going to be light and clicky. At the same time, though, they're meant to have snappy keystrokes. They're also meant to have a very high polling rate of 8,000 Hertz, and it's also going to be designed to be taking quite a few keystrokes throughout its lifetime. This particular model also comes with some multimedia keys and a digital dial. This is something I haven't had on a keyboard before. I've had buttons that have basically adjusted it as up or down on the audio or playback features, but this one is going to have a little bit more in terms of fine-tuning the volume. The playback feature buttons are a little bit interesting in the sense that they don't depress very far in. They're very light tap buttons, but basically the functionality is there for sure. As for height adjustment on the back of the keyboard, you've got 2 levels that you can do here, just in case you want a different angle. The keyboard itself comes in an aluminum frame, so it's designed to be a little bit more heavyweight, more long-term usage. It definitely feels a lot higher quality of material compared to most keyboards, which I would say use plastic, or otherwise if they are metallic, this will probably match a lot of what you're seeing. In addition to everything else that I've described up to this point, it also has macro features available, programmed through Razer Synapse. Razer Synapse is Razer's program for adjusting and customizing all of the Razer products. Just like everything else, you would be programming your keyboard through there. The lighting is fully programmable down to the key based off this software, and I should also mention the lighting uses Razer's RGB chroma technology, and it's fully programmable down to the key. I should also lastly mention, which you might have already seen in the video, but it is a full-size keyboard as well. Let's go into the performance aspect. So a few things that I did really notice about it. For starters, I'm not a big fan of louder keyboards. They do have the clickiness in this particular unit. That's part of the appeal for it, and it does have some sound dampening foam, but at the same time, I do find it is a little bit on the loud side. Now, if you have a setup that's separate, for example, like in your own room or somewhere else that's more private, that's fine. But if you're in a more public setting, this might be the kind of keyboard where it's going to pick up a lot of noise and it's going to be noticeable for people around you. It may come through on things like mics and whatnot. You can use noise gates to suppress some of that if you just put some filters on your audio, but at the same time, it is still something that is a bit of a louder keyboard. I've definitely had quieter in my time, and Razer's switches tend to be a fair bit louder. Now, I do work remotely, so I actually use my keyboard quite a bit, and one thing that I wish that this keyboard did have was macro keys. At the moment, it's basically a full keyboard. It doesn't come with unique macro keys, so you essentially do have to assign it to an already existing key in order to perform a macro function. I basically bound some of the function keys to be macros based off of what I needed, and I don't necessarily use the macros for very complicated maneuvers, more so for opening applications or for typing out specific text entries. But at the same time, this is something that is a little bit on the inconvenient side. I did notice that this is a little more commonplace when you start going up the chain. It seems like a mid-level feature to have macro keys, but I will say that if you are somebody who makes good use of them, this might not be the keyboard for you. Just a slight aside on the macro binding as well, I did find that it was a bit confusing to set it up through Razer Synapse. I have used macro binding before on other products, like through IQ with Corsair, but I did find that the Razer one was a little bit more complicated, and I accidentally was making several macros that I had no intent to bind onto a key just because I wasn't quite sure right away. So you might have to play around with the software to get the hang of it, but at the same time, once you've got it down, you should be able to program each key how you want. Now, as for the lighting itself, I will admit the sharpness and the color hue are really nice on it, but it is pretty dim, at least compared to some other stuff that I have. I'm going to show a side-by-side of my current keyboard next to the Razer one, and you'll be able to see at the max brightness for both settings that the Corsair one sticks out a lot more. It's quite a bit brighter. Now, if you're somebody who just wants to have some level of RGB on it, then it wouldn't really matter. And at the same time, like I said, there's a quality difference between the RGB lighting itself. If you want brightness to be the main feature, that's not what you should expect from this particular product. As for the actual settings for the RGB, it's pretty much what you would expect in addition to being able to program to the key. So very precise settings that you can put into place. Now, for personal thoughts, we may as well bring out the keyboard again side by side here and just talk about it. One thing that I think really does help out quite a bit is the playback features, especially the digital dial. I found myself using it a lot more than I thought I would. The digital dial adjusts the volume very precisely. I have playback features on my keyboard, but they adjust the volume up and down, and you have to hold it a certain amount if you want to quickly accelerate up and down. I did find that the dial was a lot more comfy for this. I wasn't sure if I'd like that function, but I actually do like it quite a bit. I think it's a good addition to the keyboard. I mentioned earlier, I'm not the biggest fan of louder keyboards. For me, it's maybe not my type. The aluminum frame is, though, very nice, and it feels very sturdy. I would trust this keyboard to be able to last a fairly long time. Sometimes certain keys can start to wear out over time. One thing that Razer's tried to do with this particular keyboard is have it so that the coating on the keys won't become oily and have the letters fade on it. Sometimes you can have a keyboard for a very long period of time and you lose the lettering on each key. With this keyboard, that's something that they've tried to eliminate. I won't know exactly how well that holds up to the test of time because I won't have it long enough to test it out for that, but that's a selling point for this particular product. As for the lighting, I'm not too particular about RGB, so looking at it when I think about something like the overall brightness of it, I do find that that is a little bit of a missed point on the keyboard. It is very nice that it has higher precision, but for my purposes, it's not something that I'm too concerned about. I would expect a little bit more brightness for the type of keyboard that's coming here. It's retailing at around $250 Canadian. And so even when it goes on sale and stuff like that, it still is just a little bit under $200, which is something that I would expect to have a little bit brighter keys. Obviously, there's a cost to the materials that are going into this product, but those are just my thoughts. And for the actual macro functions, I mentioned I do like having macro keys. There aren't any unique macro keys on this particular keyboard. All you're going to have is basically keys that you aren't using that you can bind to macros. I ended up using function keys, more of the top end of them, because some of those aren't commonly used in programs. Once you actually do bind the macros, then obviously they do perform according to what they're supposed to. They work very well, but it is something that I wish did have unique keys for. Now, I guess the main question that I do want to answer for products that I do have my own device for, I do like to try and answer the question of whether or not I would trade it for the current product under review. For this Razer Black Shark versus my Corsair keyboard, which is just a K55, it's not that special. I still would keep my current keyboard. I actually like it quite a bit. And so while there's a lot of positive features to look at for the Razer keyboard here in question, the main factors that sway me back towards what I have for my current keyboard is I find that the lighter typing, the macro features, and the lighting itself give me quite a bit more comfort. I'll admit that the wrist pad on the Razer and the digital dial were functions that I would wish were on my current keyboard, but if I were to do a trade-off between the two, I would be choosing my Corsair keyboard. I also think overall, for the bang per buck, I'm not entirely convinced that the $250 retail is exactly what it should be. Maybe it is a little bit on the higher end, but again, the material itself is going to be quite costly. When you end up comparing this to other keyboards that are available on the market, I don't think you're going to get anything that blows this particular model out of the park compared to other things that are there. That being said, with everything all together, it is a very solid keyboard. So thinking about a rating for this particular keyboard, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I do think that there are a lot of features in here that are very handy. I've mentioned a lot of the quality features that I really enjoy and that I think are good to have in a keyboard, especially considering how valuable it is to the setup. You do want to make sure that you have a quality keyboard at your desk. So if there's one thing that you aren't going to cheap out on, it probably should be that. The wrist pad is nice. The playback features are nice. The buttons do feel a little bit on the cheaper side just because they don't depress in the same sense that other ones that I'm familiar with do. But at the same time, functionality is a lot better and more important than how it feels. The keystrokes themselves feel just fine, and the technology behind it is very solid. So it's basically going to be something that is intended for the full gaming purpose, and it's meant to have the polling rate response time that you are looking for in a keyboard. So that's basically it for the video here. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you've tried this product out before, but otherwise that's going to be it for me today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.